everybody. My name is Cindy Cho. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Pittsburgh. I want to welcome everybody to our inaugural session for the How to Do CAP Research Workshop Series, a DEI initiative. This is sponsored by AACAP, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry's Abramson Grant. This is a monthly series that aims to address the barrier to entry into research by providing an overview of fundamental research skills and showcasing the diversity of child and adolescent psychiatry research topics, as well as research mentors. The series is intended for individuals at all career stages interested in child and adolescent psychiatry research and the incorporation of diversity, equity, and inclusivity principles into their research endeavors. We hope to inspire individuals from diverse backgrounds and at all career stages to participate in research, explore AACAP resources, and apply for AACAP research opportunities. Throughout the series, we will feature diverse child and adolescent psychiatry researchers who will share their wide array of research topics and their career wisdoms, and introduce foundational research concepts such as how to get started in research, finding a mentor, developing a research idea, finding support, presenting and publishing your work, and much more. Each hour-long session will start with a research mentor sharing their career trajectory and using their own research to explain a foundational research concept. They will then close their discussion by sharing 5 overall pearls about engaging in child and adolescent psychiatry research. We will then reserve the last 10 minutes for Q&A. So during the session, please feel free to enter questions into the chat, and the facilitator, which will be me this evening, will help share these questions during the Q&A portion of the session. And please note that the session will be recorded. So for our inaugural session, we have the honor of inviting Dr. Lisa Fortuna. Dr. Fortuna is the chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at the University of California, Riverside. She is a triple board certified psychiatrist in general psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and addiction medicine, with a focus on mental health equity, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and Latinx, refugee immigrant, child and adolescent mental health services research and intervention development. She has been an investigator on several National Institute of Health and foundation-funded studies, focusing on Latinx and immigrant mental health, integrated care, and access to care. She's also the author of the book, Mindfulness-Based CBT for Adolescent PTSD and Addictions. Dr. Fortuna earned her medical degree from the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, now Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. She then completed residencies in child and adolescent psychiatry and general adult psychiatry at St. Vincent's Hospital and Medical Center in New York. She completed a master's of public health and urban public health at Hunter College, City University of New York, and went on to earn a master's in divinity and pastoral theology from the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We are thrilled to have Dr. Fortuna join us today. And Dr. Fortuna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I think that just speaks to that I'm a glutton for punishment and going to school really a long time. I had to stop myself. So, and I'll share a little bit about that. So let me just make sure that can you see the slides? Okay, excellent. So yeah, I feel really privileged to be invited to be the inaugural speaker for this really important initiative, I think, for AACAP and for promoting CAP research. And so I'm going to focus on my journey in academic medicine very briefly, and how I have moved into the field of health services research, and I'll spend some of the time focusing on how that really has evolved into increasingly so community partnered research, all of it for advancing mental health equity. So I always put the disclosures. I'll be talking a little bit about a particular grant when I start describing my research that's funded by National Institute of Mental Health, a UO1. That's focused on transforming health disparities. And some of the artwork that you see are from the Mission District in San Francisco, where I just moved from UCSF in August. So even if you see some of the photos in the murals, they're murals that really were created by young people in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I just sort of really took to them throughout the pandemic, as I really saw them as a qualitative experience of how young people were experiencing the pandemic. A lot of imagery around that. Okay, so I'll start with my career journey. And we heard a little bit about it in terms of even just education. And I'm just spending a little bit of time in thinking about this in regards to how things evolved for me in thinking about health disparities research. So, all through pre-college and university, when I went to Yale, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, very urban context, definitely first gen in terms of going to medical school. My mom sort of pushed forward in being able to get a college degree, but she was really the first person to ever go to college in my family. So I went to Yale, which was a bit of a interesting cultural shock. But even while I was at Yale, I really developed an interest in psychology, and my major was in psychology in addition to pre-med. But I also took a lot of things around anthropology and sociology because I was very interested in the integration of thinking about mental health, psychology, and social cultural context. It's always something that was kind of interesting to me. I went back to go to medical school in Newark, New Jersey. And so I had some exposure to research in medical school, but it was primarily lab research, taking some electives and some time to work with researchers there on topics around reproductive health, some lab rat research. And that was helpful for me in the sense of finding some sense of what my feelings were about research. I don't think it was really my calling to do lab research, but it was helpful to at least start thinking about the scientific method, right? Which is why I think it's really important for medical students to have exposure to those things. And then I went to pediatrics. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a psychiatrist, even with all of that. And so I went into pediatrics, and I went to University of Puerto Rico. And you see a little sort of segment of that, the building there, Hospital Pediátrico Universitario Antonio Ortiz. So it's University Hospital of Pediatrics Antonio Ortiz in Puerto Rico, San Juan, and University of Puerto Rico, Centro Médico. And that was a very interesting awakening of the real disparities in healthcare. This is a tertiary hospital, the largest tertiary pediatrics hospital in the Caribbean. And there were just so much disparities in terms of access to care. And they actually made a mistake and gave me a month elective in child and adolescent psychiatry. And I said, oops, I'm changing to child psychiatry because I absolutely loved it. And it was clear that even when I was doing pediatrics on the floors, I was always trying to find the kids, the young people who had a mental health concern, because that's what I really loved to do. So I went back and I came back to St. Vincent's in New York City, right? So back into sort of my area of comfort in New Jersey, New York. I'm Puerto Rican, but I guess I'm a little bit more sort of a Nuyorican. So I really started to feel really comfortable back home in the New Jersey, New York area. And I was at St. Vincent's Hospital Medical Center, which is pictured here a little bit. And unfortunately, that is closed now, St. Vincent's Hospital Medical Center. But it was a very important place for me to learn again about other public health issues around the AIDS and HIV crisis, really, that I started to learn a lot about in Newark, New Jersey, where it was another epicenter for HIV/AIDS, especially around IV drug users, especially, and in New York, in the Greenwich Village, also IV drug users, but also the LGBTQ community, right, in Greenwich Village in New York. And so I became really interested in that, but I really started to really work also on immigrant mental health issues. And I ended up getting mentorship. So this is going to be a theme, the importance of mentorship. I was just minding my business, really kind of having questions about sort of these social determinants of health, social cultural determinants of health, even with the child patients that I had, where they were part of the foster care system. And I just had so many questions about, I loved like so the one-to-one clinical services that I was doing, but I kept thinking there must be something else like happening upstream that we really need to be able to work on. And so I started to make some questions about that. I started to work a lot with our immigrant mental health services at St. Vincent's. And we also had a Latino mental health clinic that was brand new. And I was the only resident who was involved in that clinic. And that was a plus or minus because I had a lot more patients, I think, than some of my other colleague peer residents because it was a bilingual clinic. I was bilingual. I could see the patients. I probably had a little bit too many patients. But I'm glad I didn't say no to it completely because I learned a lot around how do we sort of create services that are really going to be beneficial to folks who traditionally are underserved or don't have the right types of access. And so Luis Zayas, who's pictured here, the gentleman, was at Fortuna University, and he came and he, through connections with other faculty, started to mentor me on doing research. And I just started with a chart review. And what we looked at is, what were the differences in mental health needs, social determinant needs, and retention and care and outcomes for our patients who were undocumented versus our other Latino patients in the clinic. And that was one of my first papers that I actually published in Journal of Immigrant Mental Health, Immigrant and Refugee Mental Health, which that just set me on fire in terms of like, wow, like I can actually look at this stuff and people will publish it and we can learn from it. And I can get that information out there and learn so much myself about how we can improve services. And so that sort of really started to excite me about the idea of also looking at things from a public health and systems of care approach. How do we improve that? And that started to get me interested in health services research. So that's what moved me into Boston. Now, I love Boston. I was there 20 years. I was not trying to stay in Boston. I was thinking I was going to go 2 years. I was completely New York centric. I was going to go 2 years to the Harvard Pediatric Health Services Research Fellowship, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a 2-year postdoc fellowship after I finished a residency. Oh, and by the way, I did also get an MPH in my second year. I skipped over one thing. I did adult psychiatry first and then the child psychiatry. And that was out of a glitch where St. Vincent's just had a last minute opening in their child fellowship. And they said, you can do child fellowship first if that's really where you want to go, given that you've had the pediatric year. Do you want to do that? And I did. And so I did the adult training, I did the child training, and in my second year, which is towards the end of my child fellowship, I also got an MPH in urban public health. Again, this was because I was really fired up about this idea of systems and how do we think about that from a population health, public health perspective. But I wanted more. I wanted more research skills. And so the lesson I would have here is that, if anyone is really interested in really seriously thinking about research, doing some kind of, at minimum mentored training in research, but it's very helpful to do a research fellowship. And there are many around the country. This is one. It's primarily pediatricians in this one, but they did take me on as a pediatric psychiatrist. And I really was able to expand my research methods. I did additional classes at Harvard School of Public Health, in everything from sort of advanced statistical methods to qualitative methods to mixed methods. How do you design clinical trials, quality clinical trial design, all of these things that would help me sort of figure out, how to do both clinical, applied, and health service systems research. And so that was very critical. And then, sometimes you have serendipity, right? So, you know, you plan. And so remember, I was going to leave after, you know, after my second year of fellowship and go back to New York. And lo and behold, Margarita Alegria, who you see in the corner there, who is a Puerto Rican Health Services researcher who's at the University of Puerto Rico. I didn't know her when I was over there, but I always knew of her work. I was always reading her work around health disparities and immigrant mental health. Every time I would think of any kind of story of like, okay, I'm going to do research in this area. I wonder if anyone's done any research in this with this question. I would do my literature review, and Maggie Alegria would appear, having done that study completely already. So I knew that that was somebody that I really wanted to work with. And as I was finishing my research fellowship, Luis Zayas told me, oh, you go to Maggie is opening up a research center at Harvard. You better run over there and see if she'll have you work with her. And that's what I did. And so she did. And then that's how I got, in a good way, I guess, stuck in Boston, right? Because I started to work in her research center. And got an academic appointment and worked as part of her Center for Multicultural Mental Health Services Research that was based at Cambridge Health Alliance, which is an affiliate of Harvard Medical School. And these are just a list of some of the studies that I actually was able to become a co-investigator with her right out of postdoc, including the National Latino and Asian American Study, which has been the largest nationally representative database of Latinos and Asian Americans in the country, really looking at the determinants and correlates of mental health disorders and services use in the United States. So I was able to do many papers with that center as being a co-investigator, and that was really an important kickoff for my career of being able to work with a seasoned researcher in an area and topic of my interest, and to be able to work really closely with her and to write lots of papers. And that's a really sort of important step. I went on, you know, one of the things that Maggie did as a really good mentor, and I would say important to look at in a good mentor, is that she really worked with her team. She worked really hard on like her own research, but she also integrated our expertise, our knowledge. We got opportunities to write whole sections of the grants. I learned how to write NIH grants blindfolded. Like she really sort of pushed me into understanding how do you write those grants. And so that was really important. And we did other studies like patient provider study that really looked at, this was more sort of a clinically applied research project where we looked at patient provider interactions across race and ethnicity, and looked at what are some of the factors that impacted on patient experience and engagement in care. That's just one example of a study. And then we also had one that was done with an international study of US, Spain, United States and Spain, Madrid and Barcelona. And there's something special that I have to talk about in that particular issue that I think will also highlight the importance of mentorship. So when you're first starting off with your grants on your own, right? You know, Maggie, you know, later sort of supported me. She let me, she was my mentor for my NIDA K-23, which is a career development award that you can get in NIH. Those are beautiful. Those are 5-year protected, at least 75% of your time in your salary to be able to get mentored further in research methods and also do a research project funded. And it's, you know, it can be your first PI, principal investigator grant for a National Institute of Health grant. And the premise is that then after you finish your K award, you are ready to be an independent investigator, putting in, you know, independent grants like R01s, which are sort of large independent researcher studies, and they're quite large. So this is one trajectory of how to do this, right? Is to really latch on in a good way to someone who's really going to mentor and support you and get you started in your research, and then starting to get your own grants. There was a point when I finished this grant, the K-23, that I did start putting R01s. And this is sort of a reality of life. One of the things that happened was NIMH in particular, was not as interested in health services research and public health research, disparities research, let's say, at that time when I was done with my K-23. It was the director of NIMH at that point was very clear that the interest was in microbiology and genetics and pharmaceuticals. And so it was kind of hard to get, health services grants or even clinical trials in. I wrote a clinical trial. I had a hard time getting it accepted. It kept getting, not awarded. There's a message here that I want to talk about with that too, is that, let me see if I can go back, is you have to persist. So this is going to be one of the pearls I have at the end. If at first you do not succeed, you have got to keep going, and you have to find a way to keep alive in this research. So one of the things that I did was, at that point, I had finished my K award, and I wanted to get this, clinical trial done that was looking at, I wanted to move from my adolescent pilot trial of PTSD and substance use intervention, which was a therapy intervention integrating CBT and mindfulness and many other things to sort of, address PTSD and substance use. And I couldn't get the full large clinical trial awarded after my, K award. And so I called up Maggie Alegria, and I'm just, going to be, honest. I said, Maggie, I really want this. I really want this trial to go somewhere. I can't get it done, by myself. It's a really hard atmosphere right now at NIMH. Are you going to do anything that this might fit into, right? Because she would do large center grants. And she says, well, I am going to go for that International NIDA International Research Grant, which is the one that ends up being the US and Spain study. And I said, can I add my clinical trial into that large, sort of center grant, because I really want to do it. And she said, yes, that's great. We were looking for an intervention to add to it. We're also looking at some epidemiological data of Latin American immigrants in the US and in Spain, which is the largest second Latino immigrant population, right, in Spain. And I said, great, let's just put it in there because I just want to do it. And it got funded, and I call that my Trojan horse strategy for getting that grant in, because I just wanted to do it. And so I did get to do it. I got to do that clinical trial through, Maggie. And I think that was really important because it kept me alive in the research and being able to do this, and to get my sort of R01 level sort of, clinical trial going. And that was fine. It would have been more ideal for me to be able to get that independently, but I was able to then keep things going. And in the meantime, I did ongoing research, and later I got my own, which I'll talk about, and NIH grants and foundation grants and all kinds of other things. But it was really important to continue that. And I also, by the way, at the same time, was really focused on, really partnering with community organizations, irrespective if we were doing research or not, because I really think that built up my capacity to work collaboratively with communities later, which you will see, to be able to do really important community engaged research. And that included the Refugee Immigrant Assistance Center, which we did community partnership to create a clinic for refugees within a refugee immigrant resettlement center. And then that later created some more opportunities to do research together. Then in the meantime, and I'll just go through this really quickly, is I was also very interested, again, I'm a systems thinker. So, at Boston University Medical School, that's where I moved to later in Boston. I became the director of child and adolescent psychiatry. And in there, I was very interested in our clinical, our teaching and education mission, as well as our research mission, and started to create a little bit of a research lab there that really brought in child psychiatrists to be able to do research there. And then I moved to University of California, San Francisco, to be the vice chair and chief of UCSF at San Francisco General Hospital, And that's where, again, it just sort of blew up my whole sort of mission in a good way of really having this leadership role around how do we really sort of impact our systems of care, our services, and increase our research capacity in that realm. And that's what I did last until August when I moved to UC Riverside to be the chair of psychiatry, where, again, my mission is really to advance all of those areas of academic medicine, right? This is, again, just to talk about the National Latino and Asian American study, because it really was an important part of my development, to really look at how do you do these large epidemiological studies that really provide information around mental health and service use for minoritized populations, and it was really fantastic. And if you ever have an opportunity to look at the NLAS and the history of what came out of that, I really recommend it, because I think it really was a foundational study, combined with some other studies that were the combined epidemiological studies that really sort of advance our understanding of mental health in minoritized populations. And these are some of the research studies that I did, including this one, which was prevalence and correlates of lifetime suicidal ideation and attempts among Latino subgroups in the United States. Again, the power of having a large representative database to actually look at differences across, say, Mexican Americans, Puerto Rican Americans, Cuban, Mexicans. We had like the largest Latino groups and some a smaller sample of other groups. And so we were really able to look at if there were differences, which there were across groups, and then what are some of the things that actually related to the correlates of what was involved in lifetime suicidal ideation. And one of the interesting things is that it did matter in terms of female gender, which you would not be surprised about, but also if there was issues of acculturative stress, the more acculturated you were, the more likely you were to have lifetime suicidal ideation. And family conflict, no matter what else you put in those regression models, family conflict was one of the predictors of suicidality in this sample. That's a really, and we saw that across many of the outcomes that we looked at, not just suicidal ideation, but other mental health outcomes. Family conflict, really bad thing in Latino population. And then this other paper was just something that shows about why do so many Latino teens attempt suicide, a conceptual model for research that I did with Luis Zayas. Remember that mentor that was back in St. Vincent's? I kept my relationship with him and we kept doing research. And I was actually was a co-investigator on some of his research that specifically looked at the sort of elevated risk that we were seeing that time of Latina girls in any kind of sort of school-based survey of have had suicide attempts. And so we did a mixed methods, both looking at sort of questionnaires and mental health measures in groups of girls, but also doing deep qualitative analysis of family relationships and conflict. And there was definitely a family conflict relationship thing there too. And so suicidal risk has been something that has, sort of emerged ongoing in my research, looking at social cultural factors. In that US-Spain study, we also found that even for adults, seriously thinking about yourself killing yourself in the last 30 days was as high as 30% in an immigrant Latino population, both in the US and Spain. In immigrant in a primary care setting, in community setting. That was concerning. The actual suicide attempts was very low, but the distress level, I think that was there in terms of serious suicidal ideation at 30%, that was very significant in my mind. And that's something that we published. And two factors that were involved in that were a sense of not belonging here in the United States or in your country of origin anymore. And also having citizenship stressors was very significant around suicidal ideation. And then here you see the other paper I talked to you about, family conflict and suicidal ideation. And then another paper that has been really significant from the NLAS is where we looked at cross-generation experiences of discrimination and depression, and how that resulted in depression or was correlated with depression. And that was a paper that I did with Deborah Joy Perez and Dr. Alegria in 2008. And that paper is one of the most cited papers I was looking at the other day, and it's like close to 800 citations at this point, because it was so important to do something that was nationally representative and what was the real impact of experience of discrimination across Latino groups. And I think it's just something that people ended up citing. The other thing that we did is we looked at childhood trauma and psychiatric disorders. It was an adult sample again in the NLAS, but we did do some historical sense of, childhood diagnoses or experiences, and then also what were people's educational attainment. And in this paper done with Dr. Michelle Porsche, we found that, childhood trauma was associated with an increased odds of dropping out. And some of the things that were mediating that were having a substance use disorder and having a conduct disorder. And that sort of posed really interesting considerations about how are we really defining conduct, because we also found that, it was particularly this dropout rate, these associations were particularly related to youth who were longer here in the United States, and also and this, we actually were able to look at some of the combined data of not just the Latinos, but Black and Latino youth having significantly more of this association, right? So this whole thing of being pushed out and defined as having conduct disorder, and what that trajectory and history is. So since then, if we start from the bottom up, you'll see that, I started with a K23, which is that CBT treatment for PTSD and substance use disorders in minority youth. That was again, the mentored research grant that I mentioned from NIH, NIDA in particular. And that's the other thing. I went for NIDA because it was substance use and PTSD, but remember, there were all these issues going on with NIMH even then in terms of not doing so many health services grants. And that was something that I was able to learn from my mentor, right? Again, people telling me sort of what is the environment right now at NIMH, and really thinking strategically of what is a better institute that's appropriate, right? But that I could work with in my K. And then since then, if we go from the bottom up again, I did a PCORI, which is a principal investigator, which was a large multi-state grant that we were looking at comparing online and in-person CBT for youth with anxiety disorders, called the Kids Face Fear Study. This was a large, multi-million-dollar grant that I got to be a principal investigator on. And again, this is when I really started to hone in on how do we do interventions and how do we improve access to care. And so this is where I brought all of the clinical trial research training, all that health services training to bear. And then I was a co-investigator on optimizing a paraprofessional family partner navigation model with colleagues, again, NIMH funded, where we looked at how do we really examine what are the effective and efficient components of integrating family partners within primary care to support child's mental health needs. And so that's, again, sort of integrating clinical trial methodology and health services methodology. And then one of my sort of more recent studies is by youth for youth, which I'll talk a little bit about, a little bit of detail, not tremendously, but so you can get a feeling for like what are really the methods that are implemented in there. But it's by youth for youth, which is, again, using digital interventions. It's an app that focuses on screening, triage, care coordination, and to be used in combination with peer and family navigators to help youth, especially in underserved areas. We're doing it in schools in Los Angeles and community clinics in now Riverside. Started at San Francisco, but I moved to moved. I'm in the process of moving that grant to Riverside. So that's really to try to get, again, looking at addressing disparities. This I just have here because we know that the COVID-19 exacerbated all of the things that we were seeing already increasing in mental health. And we've seen these statistics, increase in inpatient visits for suicide, increase in mental health hospital stays, increase in the rates of self-reported mental health needs. And we also know that there was disproportionate impact on Black and Brown children, right? In the publicly insured, the suicide rate for Black children was already increasing. There was already disparities in the ways that youth needs were unmet in terms of behavioral health needs. For example, youth of color more dramatically represented in juvenile justice. These are California statistics. They're not different usually in most other states. And so the premise of all of this research that I had been doing and understanding what really impacts on disparities, right? I've been talking a lot about social cultural factors, but in all the research that we were doing, we're always seeing these structural factors, right? What was the impact of poverty? What was the impact of citizenship? What was the impact on, having access to local people who could actually take care of your mental health needs, as well as the quality of those mental health needs, right? So really my premise has really been that, healing-centered care is not just sort of tweaking the access to programs, but it really acknowledges the role of racialized stress, of poverty, and social and emotional health, and those structural determinants of health. And so more and more I have been integrating that. And so this was a paper that I wrote during the pandemic, which was on inequity and disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the communities of color in the United States. And it's where we were really talking about, what has been that disproportionate impact on adults and children, and what's the need for a trauma-informed social justice response, which really we argued was around really looking critically at policy and structural determinants that have been impacting young people and their families for decades, right? And that the COVID-19 pandemic, really brought to bear into people's minds. And what do we need to do around transforming those structures and those systems? And then also, how do we work with communities to be able to make those changes? So that has made me really lean into co-designing, what I call co-designing health equity with communities. And what I mean, I will talk about in a little bit more in detail here. So really, we're talking about fostering authentic partnerships. One of the things that I have come to even learn myself is that it really is around understanding, recognizing power dynamics when we're working with communities in research. For a long time, we've been including people in research. I mean, even with the NLAS, right? But were they really involved in the design and what we were going to do in that research, right? So not too long ago, in the last couple of years, I did this thing called a do ethnography. And this is a methodology that might be interesting as you move along your research course. And we're trying to also maybe do this with community members also thinking about this. This is a qualitative method where we were reflective around sort of writing about, myself and Michelle Porsche, who is like the first author on this, and other colleagues who were doing research. We sat and we started to independently write about how we felt about the research we were doing that was supposedly co-design or collaborative work with communities. What were the methods that we were using? Where were we satisfied? Where were we unsatisfied about the degree of really conceptualizing and collaborating with community members in the design and the implementation of the research? And then we sort of reflected on each other's writings and really did a qualitative analysis of what were like the core themes. And really the prompts we had is, what have we learned about working collaboratively with communities? What does it mean for a researcher to really share leadership in that research? And how do we address power differentials and exclusionary contexts that we're trained in, right? In academic research, we're not immune. And we really realized that, as privileged investigators, we were often asking for feedback, information, rather than really sharing responsibility around the research. We relied on our own expertise, technology, all those years of education, all those things that, we've been learning for ages, but really trying to really have the community identify both problems and solutions, right? Like I'm good at sort of finding solutions, or it's a family conflict, it's whatever, but really working with communities to learn that. And we all have heard about this sort of, dropping in and taking from the community, met with skepticism. And that makes sense for them to be skeptical of the community. And checking our own views, even incorporating really cultural humility in what we are doing and how we're designing the technology and what we want to answer. And so the For Youth by Youth, which is the UO1 that I mentioned a little earlier, one of my more recent projects funded by NIMH, is exactly what we're doing. Is we're looking at school-based and pediatric primary care services as ideal hubs for providing care, using participatory design and research methods, connecting in terms of the app design, and also how are we implementing it in schools and primary care, and how are we using that navigator who's promoting the use of the app and the skills. And the app has many things that I'll tell you about, but how do we sort of promote that and engage young people in care? And it started with initially a pre app that it's called Connected for Schools, and now it's a Connected for Wellness. And these are the investigators that I'm working with on that grant. And one of the things that we're trying to optimize is really, there's a growing thing, at least in California, to use sort of these peer ambassadors, peer support, really developing that, and it's becoming a big thing in California. And the California Children's Trust is really working in these models in schools. So we're working with those youth and the app to be able to really do assessments in high schools or primary care clinics, and the youth and family navigators. So some of those family navigators are like youth allies, and also, individuals and counselors that work with parents and families to help them around mental health access, and also with the Connected for Wellness app, learning skills around emotional regulation, CBT skills, how do you sort of immediately react to sort of mental health crises, and also what are some social determinant resources. And there's an opportunity to give sort of universal sort of support, as well as sort of identify those youth who need targeted support or more intensive support. And these are just sort of a little bit of the definitions. And we're looking at how that impacts on the cascade of care. Basically, do we improve the identification of kids in need, linking them to care, initiating, and that they initiate care. And again, we're really looking at a lot of input from youth and adult co-developers, and actually co-developing like what the app looks like, what's included, lessons learned from our other studies, population health analyses of what are some of the things that need to be with this app and this app navigator combo. And then we're actually starting to apply what's becoming hotter and hotter is sort of AI algorithms to sort of what that is going to basically do is within the app, how are anonymous users, because that's what the youth said, they'll only use this app if they're anonymous in using it, and only sort of disclose the connection with the navigators when they're ready. How can the app sort of look at what the users are doing to be able to guide them and sort of give recommendations of things that might be helpful for them? And so that's a longer story, but that design came out of actually the co-design process. And also really doing qualitative methods to understand what they were wanting, right, in this app. And some of the things that they wanted were things on academic stress related to identity, family stress, bullying, isolation, relationships. So we really worked, for example, the academic stress content, right? Strategies for first-gen students, meditations for focus and attention. These are all things that we've been designing, and these are all takeaways. It has to be anonymous, they told us, self-directed and culturally responsive. The parents, we realized needed to be also activated and engaging and supporting. Emphasis on prevention, social determinant resources, and academic pressures. And this just shows that there's some parallel in what the youth and parent caregiver have. And it's in English and Spanish. And there's even materials designed by parents that are Spanish speaking videos, all kinds of really nice content that's being co-created. And it also has check-ins about overall well-being, community resource needs, and guiding people to those resources. So I'm going to end because we want to leave a few minutes for questions. But my latest wonderful opportunity is to work with this organization in San Francisco of essential workers called Somos Esenciales. And these are participatory action researchers who were participatory action researchers before I even met them. Like, it wasn't that I called them and said, yeah, let's do participatory action research. They were already doing it. And they emerged out of the food hub, Mission Food Hub, which was a place where people came to eat and get food during the pandemic when everybody was devastated economically by the pandemic, especially in the immigrant, Latino, and essential worker community. And they found a lot of strength and healing on the people who came to work from the community there, like Carmela Gomez, who says it served as a form of therapy for me to volunteer and to work. And she actually became one of the participatory action researchers that became possible through a grant that came through the arts, interestingly enough, to see what was the impact of the pandemic on the Latino immigrant population. The reason I got out there was because I remember I told you, always reach out to the community. And they heard of me and they told me to please come out and see what we're doing. And that was, these investigators, right? And they were all about nothing about us or for us without us. And they showed me all of their sort of research methods, which was participatory. They really looked at socially engaged knowledge, how they can, use their traditional knowledge and create community scholarship. And they called it folk life-based participatory action research. And then, they found through their study during the pandemic that mental wellness practices were things that they could identify from community members, that mental health was one of the key issues that emerged from the pandemic. And so they really said, we need a centro cultural, or establish a cultural center for mental health. People need to fund our solutions for mental wellness and support research done by, for, and by our community. And so lo and behold, NIH, new day, thank God, really interested in structural determinants of health, developed community partnership to advance science for society grants that make the community-based leaders the principal investigators of the study, and the academic centers are the partners or the co-investigators. And they're all focused on developing health equity research models that are community-led. When I saw this opportunity, I told Somos, I think you guys can do this. You should go for it. And they did. And we helped write a grant together, and they got it. They awarded it that. And it's a community revitalization and health through Latino arts and entrepreneurship study. And they're going to be looking at over 5 years, and it may go as long as 10 years, looking at multidimensional interventions on home ownership, entrepreneurship, and urban farming, combined with culturally centered care, and how that has impact on a population health basis, on stress reduction, economic development, healthy nutrition, and sort of all sort of brought together through promotoras, right? So you can see how this is just psyching me out about like all of the stuff that I've been doing for decades and how this really can work. So I'm going to end with the pearls, and we can go from here, the questions. I have mentorship there 3 times. It should really be there like 200 times. You can see how important mentorship and guidance and having a network of mentors was important for me. And I know you've probably heard this, but I'm hoping you hear in my story, I would have been, nowhere, right, without having the mentorship and being able to reach out to mentors when I just really needed help out of like even being stuck in the mud, right? Formal research training and our work with a senior researcher over time in an apprenticeship type style that, you have to be able to get that research training. Persistence. You get a reject, review it, revise it, resubmit it, whether it be a grant or paper, keep going. Take opportunities also to be a reviewer and to sort of see what it is on the other side to review grants or papers and things like that. You can do that partnered with your mentor. That gets you to understand what people are looking at and how you can do this really clear and say yes to those opportunities. Gain experience in different areas of clinical research. If you can pursue advanced education, research fellowships, it is helpful. Again, gain experience in different areas of clinical research. Again, seek mentorship and professional development opportunities and network. And we know that AACAP has many research award portfolio options. Some of these are active, and I have mentored people through some of them. And I think we're really focused on having some more options that I think are going to be coming through shortly. So, okay, I talked fast. I talked a lot. We have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So our first question, Dr. Fortuna, I felt very identified with your presentation since I'm a pediatrician for South America who switched to psychiatry. As you know, research in the pediatric population is difficult, and even more so if the community is Latino. What do you think is the biggest barrier in research in the Latino youth and child population?
So yeah, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of opportunity too. So what would I say is the largest problem? I mean, I think to really do quality mental health research with the Latino community in general, right, is just that. Like, I think you have to be able to engage the trust of that community, right? So if I even think about trying to do a clinical trial, even within a clinic, right? I think if you don't have the trusting relationship of the community, it will be very difficult to enroll any of your participants, right? And there's a lot of hesitancy, right, traditionally, of people being involved in research. So that's one thing. So trust, and also that you actually are providing help and support and services for that community that exists outside of your research, right? Because you have to be able to give something, right? The other piece is people's awareness of research, right? If you're engaging the Latino community, parents, and youth, there's an importance of them understanding research, right? And what does it mean for them to be real participants in that, right? I mean, for the longest time, I had the hardest time even, people understanding what's, informed consent, right? And being able to participate in research. And so we've done all kinds of things from, videos about what does it mean to participate in research, doing education about research, and then also thinking about what are the sort of the primary questions that the community has. Because historically, it's that enrollment and including, young people, that's always the challenge.
Thank you. So it's very clear that you're very passionate about your research topic, and that's one of your key takeaways is that if you're passionate about it, you can persist. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe how people can go about figuring out what their passion might be and how to make that kind of more synthesized into a coherent research question or direction?
Yeah, so I think, remember I was talking a little bit about how I really got excited about this idea of access. Like, why can't people access the services, and why can't they access the right services, right? Like, that was sort of a, so if you feel like you have even if it's like very broad and it seems vague, like if you have like this persistent, like that, like, why is this happening? Or like, why, like, what are the things that I'm asking why about a lot, right? Or then those might be sort of very broad types of questions. And then I think the next step, and it is a real skill, to get those sort of broad questions into research questions or scientific questions. And that's where I think mentoring, or a class that really focuses on how do you do, the scientific method, because to me, that's one of the trickiest things, but the most learnable things. How do you get from, I really wonder about, kids with bipolar disorder and substance use, or I really wonder about young children and attachment issues and their outcomes. I really wonder about like access to care for kids in foster care, what are those things that you really ponder and really find interesting? And it might just be a starting point. because even though mine seems cohesive, they may evolve. But the thing is to take that one thing and figure out and work with somebody who really knows. And I've done this a lot with people, like, how do you get this down to a question, a researchable question? What's the bite there that you can start with? And really working with someone to be able to do that. And that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. We do have a comment that I want to share and then go on to the next question. Says, thank you very much. This was an excellent talk. I'm hopeful to get more involved in research and hopefully do qualitative research with eating disorders, obesity, and depression in minority youth. Hopefully there will be funding opportunities in my lane as well. I don't know if you can comment a little bit about that in terms of funding opportunities and how to go about finding them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely, these areas are interesting right now. And I think health services and also child and adolescent behavioral health, mental health research, I think is getting a lot more attention, which is wonderful. And that's both at the federal level. You can do a search also for like foundation research, like Robert Wood Johnson Foundation likes to do a lot of things around pediatric health, obesity, NIMH, NIH. Those are perfect questions around K awards or, pilot awards. You can definitely do some of that, some research with a mentor with AACAP fellowships. Those are really important topics that I think, are getting funded right now. Yes, I would look at all the AACAP resources, and I would also look at NIH, NIMH, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Thank you. Okay, next question. You mentioned how difficult it is to get consent for research. How has this impacted LGBTQ plus mental health research in recent times?
Yeah, it's bad right now. I think even with my app, for example, right? Like one of the things that we wanted to see is if we were impacting on LGBTQ youth, right? One of the concerns was we don't want anybody to be identified, right, as being part of the app. Now it's anonymous, right? But things are very sensitive right now. There's some school systems that are saying, like, if the school picks up anything about like a youth using other pronouns or or presenting is not the gender that they expect the youth to be, that they have to tell the parents. There's actually like sort of school districts that are saying that, outing, to their parents. And all kinds of other really concerning things. And so some of the things that we've done with IRB, which is a possibility when you're especially working with particularly vulnerable youth, is seeing if you can get, for example, a waiver of consent, like, that from a parent, for example, to engage in research, because you can sometimes argue if you're doing something that is not a high risk research study, like you're not doing a surgical procedure, right? Not a high research thing. It's more so of a behavioral health supportive intervention or something like that. You can ask, for example, for your human subjects IRB, to waive parental consent because it would be a risk for youth participation, right? For an adolescent to participate in its low risk research. So there's all kinds of things that are evolving like that to sort of help youth privacy in those particular situations.
Thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time. We're 1 minute over, and I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Fortuna. This was an amazing first session to really set the tone for the rest of this workshop series. So this will happen every third Thursday of the month. We hope you'll come back and join us in December, where we actually will have, you mentioned a lot about AACAP research award opportunities, and we will have a Q&A with past awardees. So a great time to come back if you're inspired by Dr. Fortuna, learn a little bit about what are the tips for success for applying to these awards so that you can also start your research journey. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Fortuna. And thank you for leaving your contact so that people can reach out to you.
Yes, please do. And don't give up. That's my main message, keep at it.
Thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.